Nero on the left, Messalina on top, Agrippina right underneath her, which makes this a perfectly appropriate time at last to bring up the stemma or family tree of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. This version, a little simplified, although you may not believe it, but this is rather simplified, I got from somewhere years ago, and it's one of the many that were drawn up with the specific intention of showing the relationships between the people who served as emperor, as princeps, during the Julio-Claudian dynasty. And those individuals' names are all highlighted in red, as you can see on here. Augustus at the top, the line above him shows his father and mother, Gaius Octavius and Accia, who was Julius Caesar's niece. So Augustus, then Nero, Tiberius, Claudius, and Caligula are all listed there. Nero is listed twice, which is funny, but that's because he's shown in one place for his descent. Over there on the left, you see who his parents were, and down there on the lower right, Nero shows up again to show his relationship with his wives and their family relationships. So those guys are all knitted together pretty tightly, and it's quite interesting to see how this family fits together. If you know how to read these stemmas, you can tell that the double line indicates bond of marriage, and when there's a double line with a number, that indicates the number of that marriage in sequence. For instance, Claudius, who's over there on the right of this chart, has a 3 on the left, showing that Messalina was his third wife, and a 4 on the right, showing that Agrippina the younger was his fourth and final wife. Even more interesting for our purposes right now is what we see if we highlight some of these female members. I added these ovals, labeling in gold and purple appropriately Agrippina the elder and Agrippina the younger. The purple ones are the younger one, and the ones in gold are the elder Agrippina, who got her name, you can see there, by virtue of being the daughter of Agrippa. Remember Agrippa, who married Julia, and from that marriage, Agrippina and several other people were born. That was the line in which Augustus Caesar was placing much of his hope. So this young woman, Agrippina the elder, who in the end will marry Germanicus, is the granddaughter of Augustus. All of her children, therefore, are direct descendants of Augustus, putting them in a very key position as far as the transfer of power and dignity and their popularity with the people who loved Augustus and Caesar. That applies to Agrippina. It applies to Agrippina the younger, the one circled in purple, who was her daughter and who was also, as you can see by her lower position there, she was the sister of the Emperor Caligula. Therefore, if Caligula is the nephew of Claudius, Agrippina is Claudius's niece, and she shows up again there on the right as Claudius's wife. Very interesting nexus of relationships there. But she's highlighted 3 times on this chart, isn't she? Why is she over there on the left? That's to make it clear to us her ancestry. She was married to Gnaeus Domitius, and he was the grandson of Mark Antony. Agrippina, therefore, was the step-granddaughter, if that's the term, of Mark Antony himself, making her son, Nero, a descendant not only of Augustus Caesar, but of his mortal enemy, Mark Antony. So, people who still held to the cherished memory of Antony and his marriage to Octavia, Augustus' sister, and all the children that marriage produced, those people have their own reasons to have ties of loyalty to Nero as well. This is just so that we can get a feel for the extreme importance of these imperial women, similarly to the importance of many women of noble status in Rome, as connectors and very often as movers and shakers, if not manipulators, behind the scenes. So if you feel like I study that chart a little bit more, keep those relationships in mind, and you can probably find better versions of this family tree out there in the world of the wild, wild web. On to Nero, who will be the final member of this family to serve as emperor. Came to power after the death by poisoning, of his adoptive father Claudius. And in the first years of his reign, Nero does not show himself to be the Nero that we think we remember through popular culture. In fact, earlier on, he was benefiting from the advice of some very skilled counselors, one of them being a gentleman named Lucius Annaeus Seneca, a famous writer and philosopher, another one named Afranius Burrus, who was prefect of the Praetorian Guard. One of the earliest actions taken by Nero under the guidance of these two guys was to distribute cash grant, a donative as they called it, of 15,000 sesterces per man to the members of the Praetorian Guard. That's a tradition that we already saw Claudius instituting when he became emperor. Along with this, the leadership of Burrus made sure that he was firmly supported by the Praetorians, and this is clearly the case in the first few years of his reign. You see that phrase on there in Latin, quinquennium Neronis. That's not a phrase that people were using at this time, but a later emperor refers to that period. It means literally the 5 years of Nero, with the context making clear that this was thought of as one of the best times in the history of the early empire. The golden 5 years of Nero. It's not exactly clear which 5 years those were, but looking at how things went, it's very likely that it means the first 5 years of his reign, when he's quite young. He's 17 years old. And he is carefully following the advice of his elders, specifically Seneca and Burrus, also his mother. Burrus advised him on military issues and on power politics. Seneca advised him on the delicate matter of relations with the Senate. Since Seneca himself was a senator, he was a good person for that. And also on financial administration, how to handle the money. Also, as a man of letters, Seneca was in a good position to stroke Nero's artistic leanings. And he had good ways of flattering him in private, kind of buttering him up. Another thing that Seneca was apparently responsible for was writing a long poem, not all that long, but a longish poem, which turned out to be a satire making fun of Claudius, who's now dead, and this in the form of an eulogy on the deification of Claudius, because Claudius had, of course, been made a god with his wife, Nero's mother, as the high priestess of the cult of Claudius. So the deification of Claudius, everybody could see how that was kind of a weird idea, but he was actually an emperor with some record of success, and he had still powerful supporters alive after his death, so it's not all that odd that he would receive divine cult, but the teenage Nero, I'm sure, was snickering at it, as teenagers tend to do. So he found it delightful when Seneca wrote this poem about the deification of not a human being, but a pumpkin, a colocynth. That's a Latin word for kind of a squash. Actually, no. It's not the deification of the pumpkin. It's the turning into a pumpkin of the departed emperor. So rather than apotheosis, which means becoming a god, it's called the apocolosyntosis, the becoming a pumpkin. It's kind of a weird piece to read, and the humor doesn't translate very well, but Nero apparently loved it. Seneca also composed speeches for Nero, including an inaugural speech to the Senate where he made some very admirable promises. For instance, he promised that he was going to follow the model of Augustus in running his principate. He would end all those secret trials. He would do away with the corruption of court favorites and freedmen. He would respect the privileges of the Senate and the senators. And the hallmark of his regime would be clementia, meaning toleration and mercy. People liked that idea, and the reign did begin well. He took various symbolic steps along with those explicit speeches. He refused to accept the title offered to him of Father of his country. He opposed maestas treason trials. He avoided using the word imperator as a personal name. Imperator had been part of the personal name of Augustus and some of the other emperors since him, but it is a word implying military strongman. And Nero said, I don't want to really associate myself with that kind of thing, so he left that out of his official name. But with Nero now in power, and with his mother as one of his trusted advisors, and also as the high priestess of the most recent emperor, Agrippina is now all set. She's ready to do what she needs to do. She's ready to rule through her son, if that's her inclination. One of the things she did fairly early on was get rid of some of her potential rivals and potential opponents, including a very noble Roman named Marcus Junius Silanus, who, if you look up his stemma, his family tree, you can tell he was a bit of a threat because he was actually a great grandson of Augustus. She also took moves against some of Claudius's surviving freedmen, including Narcissus. She had her own image put on the Roman coinage as Augusta, which means empress. She patronized various colonies of former soldiers, including Colonia Agrippina, which was named after her and is the important German city of Köln, or Cologne, right in between Germany and France. In the meantime, though, the others are scheming against her. Seneca and Burrus are not going to give up on power if they can avoid it. They were able to get Nero's ear and convince him that he would be a lot happier with her out of the way. Well, there's a lot of ins and outs here. I won't go into them, but they're interesting to read about in the biography by Suetonius, and of course in Tacitus as well. Seneca and Burrus were probably also among those who were whispering rumors of weird things going on in the imperial family, like these rumors that there was actually incest between Agrippina and her son. Then came something that you might see as foretelling a break that's going to come up. It's an episode in which some foreign ambassadors from far to the east, from the kingdom of Armenia, had come to Rome to plead their kingdom's case before the emperor. In this situation, the emperor was, this is a few years after he had taken power, and he's willing to take more of his own way and not necessarily always take direction in what decisions he should make or how he should act in diplomatic situations. So in the audience hall where he's listening to the ambassador's speeches, as he seated there on his ceremonial stool, his mother was behind him in a curtain, sort of hidden from view. But when he made a response that she thought was ill-advised or inappropriate, she came out into full view and told her son that's not the way to do things, which of course scandalized not only everybody observing, but also infuriated her son. That was one of the first cracks to show up in this relationship. Then, in the year 55, some of her supporters were put out of the way. She began to feel isolated. She she was looking for help from Britannicus, but he had also been killed, conveniently, maybe on Nero's own orders, and Nero's beginning to act a little bit rowdy, beginning to attend some all-night parties to show his resistance and resentment at the restrictions that are imposed on him. And he's beginning to hang around with some women who are seen as not being high class enough for him. For instance, his lover, the freed woman Acte, whom he apparently felt a lot of affection for. Agrippina pounced on that. She made moves towards Nero's official wife, Octavia, but that last move was one straw too many. Nero openly broke with her, ordered her to leave the imperial palace, and took up with another lover, Poppaea Sabina, wife of one of his noble friends, a guy named Otho, who was sent off to a distant governorship. That encouraged Nero's hatred of his mother. Eventually, he decided the only way to get out from under her thumb was to murder her. Well, a whole series of bizarre and frankly pathetic incidents follow, and I won't go into any detail on those stories. They're interesting to read about. Eventually, though, she was bluntly assassinated by Roman soldiers who were sent to her home by Nero and his agents. I paused on this slide too long. There's a lot more to say about Nero, but I have to stop here, put this one in the can, and I'll come back again in a few minutes.